If you're ready to unlock more better days, to take control of your health, to push past your limits and unleash your full potential, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Bettle. For over 2 decades, I've worked with elite athletes and high performers, helping them optimize their bodies, strengthen their minds, and recover from setbacks. Now I'm bringing that expertise to you through the Vitality Collective podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the science, strategies, and real-world solutions you can apply right away. Whether it's enhancing your physical performance, avoiding or recovering from injury, sharpening your mental edge, or simply feeling your best every single day. With insights from top experts and thought leaders, this podcast is designed to help you take action, feel better, and live the life that you deserve. Welcome to the Vitality Collective podcast, where every day is vital. Today I'm joined by Kevin Vance, a former Navy SEAL, firefighter, and now passionate advocate for the responsible use of plant medicine in healing trauma. In this episode, we dive into Kevin's extraordinary journey through elite service, the unseen toll that it takes, and how traditional plant medicine helped him reclaim his vitality. We explore the differences between psychedelics and plant-based healing, the power of proper integration, and the importance of community in recovery. If you've ever wondered how to support trauma recovery in a meaningful, grounded way, this conversation is for you. Let's get started. I'm here with a very special guest today to dive into the fascinating world of psychedelic medicine. It's an area that I'm really passionate about, and there's a lot of demystification that has to happen here and a ton of education. And there's nobody better to talk about that than my guest and great friend, Kevin Vance. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's an honor to be speaking with you today on subjects that mean so much to me and they're near and dear to my heart. I would like to make one correction. I don't know if I am the best person to talk about these things, but I certainly have enough experience to talk about things and share things that I've learned along the way and continue to learn. So hopefully those things serve your audience, and just certainly happy to be able to serve you.
Kevin, I'd love for people to understand your journey to this work in helping people heal through these different modalities. What brought you to this work?
Well, I think it's important that I talk a little bit about my background so people can really understand what brought me to the space.
Mm-hmm.
I started my young life, like many people like yourself, in athletics. I played water polo in university. I had an opportunity to play for the national team in Canada. And so I was playing on a relatively high level when I left college. After university, I had entered the delayed entry program with the military. From there, I'd gone through Navy SEAL training buds, basic underwater demolition SEAL school. And that was in 1995. From there, I spent 8 years in that community. From there, I had multiple roles and responsibilities within my team, my unit. And then from there, I had gone to work for the government, and I had deployed numerous times into Iraq and different parts of Central Asia, North Africa, and the Arab world. And I had a couple injuries overseas, and it caused me to kind of really reflect about where I wanted to go in my life. Since I had a medical background as a corpsman, essentially a medic and a medical officer in my units, I had opted to pursue firefighting in Southern California and Orange County, which I spent the last 16 years. Both as an instructor in different academies, meeting the rank of captain, working also as a FEMA rescue specialist, because we were a FEMA task force responding to different disasters. So I wore numerous hats there, and recently retired medically just because after 30 plus years of serving in some capacity, my body was reaching a point where it was just wasn't recovering the way it should have. And that includes my mental wherewithal as well. Too many years of sleep deprivation and imbalances and dysregulation. They just catch up with you. I don't say that with any ill will towards the stuff that I was doing. I just say that because that's part and parcel with serving in these communities that so many thousands of people do.
Yeah.
But that came the cost for me was I had some pretty severe nervous system dysregulation. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know at the time that the conditions that I was coming across, the issues were essentially mild panic attacks, and there's a stigma with that, and as well as irritation, fatigue, um, and it's a combination of things that were happening to me. TBI from being a breacher in my platoon
Mm-hmm.
and being exposed to multiple explosions, both in training and then overseas. Um, and then the physical injuries,
Mm-hmm.
and with sleep deprivation and constantly pushing my body in the fire service. I had hormonal dysregulation. My pituitary and my hypothalamus were both damaged, and my
Mm-hmm.
frontal lobes were both damaged from TBI. Um, and um, and so I kind of came at an impasse. My wife, who's very supportive and loving, um, you know, was very, very supportive in terms of me pursuing a solution.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was in trials with peptides. Um, I had gone to meditation retreats. I tried to slow everything down. Um, and and then I came across what I'll call the plant medicine world, shamanic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when it comes to quote unquote the word psychedelics, I'd like to kind of make a disclaimer there. I think
Mm-hmm.
the word psychedelics is a Western word for, and what, in my opinion, as I hold as something synthetically derived or
Mm-hmm.
synthetically derived from a plant, something made in a lab,
Right.
LSD and so forth. And the medicines that I had come across were all plants and plant derived. So,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a tremendous effect on my spiritual growth. TBI, the symptoms were subsided significantly,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and also really calming my nervous system. My nervous system for over 30 years, for a significant period, had been in fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
I was essentially working in chaotic environments,
Yeah.
and if that's sustained for too long, you get into a chronic state. So
Mm-hmm.
my biggest issue that led to panic attacks was, as one of my very good friends explained to me, Emily Hightower, who is a breathwork specialist, she said, panic attacks aren't the result of necessarily of just something. They're also basically an energy discharge. Your nervous
Mm.
system
Interesting.
just wants to let go. So when it comes, let it rip.
Right.
With such a unique perspective. So with some breath work and meditation, I started to get a hold of things with brain treatment. With the brain treatment center, I started to get a hold of things, but this started my journey into what else is out there, like so many
Yeah.
veterans are doing today.
Yeah. So,
Uh,
Kevin, I just want to, if we can just pause there, and I want to unpack some of that. I don't think people can really have an appreciation who haven't been in the situations you've been in. Um, when you're in those special operations units, what was that tempo of training, deployment? Uh, how do you rest and recuperate? What's the cadence, I guess, that you're operating on?
well, the culture is very unique because you're dealing with very committed and dedicated individuals on
Hmm.
on an elite level. So the bar is always very high because it's
Hmm.
not just it's high standards within the community, but the person left and right of you, they're the bar. So you're always trying to meet and or exceed that bar. So people are
Hmm.
always pushing one another. Excellence is just it's part and parcel with the
Right.
community. And you're paid to train, so you're
Right.
always training and you're always pushing yourself, and you're in austere environments and weather and various terrains, preparing for the eventualities that you don't know what's coming. And
Hmm.
September 11th changed all of that.
Right.
um, and sleep deprivation is also a part of that. So not only are you breaking yourself down physically consistently and trying to build strength and resiliency, and resolve within your system, you're preparing to work in stressful environments, so you're under stress
Hmm.
quite a bit as part of a tool to prepare you for those environments. Um, and it's consistent. because if you let off the gas pedal, so to speak, then
Hmm.
you're creating a window for, you know, maybe weakness or
Right.
maybe a drop in your skill sets. And that carried on. So
Yeah.
overseas, that tempo increased. Now you're in these environments, so stress has increased. And then, and then that transition into firefighting, it's you don't know when the next call is going to come.
Hmm.
And so you're getting in your workouts when you can and you're training when you can in between these calls that may or may not break up those training routines.
Hmm.
And then at night, you're just subject to the needs of the community. So you
Yeah.
respond to calls at night. So all of these things can lead to serious dysregulation. But I think we're in a unique period. People are becoming more aware of
Hmm.
what we can implement and use.
Hmm.
At the same time, take better care of ourselves
Yeah.
for the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen the increase in investment for the special operators community in terms of support staff and high performance departments. I've been down and visited with those guys in Coronado. I guess that wasn't always like that, once you got into the community. And I'm wondering, how did you deal with injury as you were going through? Now, we've talked about physical injury to your body as a breacher, and you mentioned the TBI, which is a traumatic brain injury for anyone who's not familiar. Um, there's physical injury to the brain there. And then I guess there's also the element of the psychological trauma that you may have gone through both in training and in deployments as you go through. Let's say you jump and sprain your ankle. Are you out for 2 days and rest and heal? How do you work with that?
The community has transitioned quite a bit. Back when I had initially gone through training was in 1995.
Mm,
And there's an adage in the community like, suck it up and move on. Even the U.S. Rangers have something akin to that as well. And I'll pause there to all think of that or it's endure the suck, is
right.
kind of, and so you're young, you're able to recover very quickly. But with injuries, it's very common. Everybody has some
Hmm.
injury or two or three of some sort, and you push through, and you
Hmm.
can because you're young and strong, but also the culture, right? It's just part of the culture.
Hmm.
But since the wars and in terms of evaluating the performance of the people, a lot of money has been invested in various types of rehab and treatments and recuperation to include the veteran nonprofits that exist out there, the Special Operations Warrior Fund,
Hmm.
America First, which was the Semper Fi Fund, and the Navy SEAL Foundation, the SEAL Future Foundation. Numerous of these nonprofits have poured money and or directed, veterans and even active duty to resources to help basically allow that person to recapture their nervous system,
Mm.
recapture their full mobility, get some brain treatment, go to sleep centers to get their sleep evaluated,
Hmm.
um, and certainly a lot of others, so that puts that person back in terms of their peak performance or optimal performance for their age or their condition, whatever that is.
Hmm. And what do you think has been the impetus for some of that change? Is it just seeing the accumulation of after effects that this has on the community, or do you think there were specific events that led to that change?
Well, I can speak to some people that I know that I call close friends in the community that spent far more time in the special operations community than I did. They really did a lot of heavy lifting throughout their career, and because of the demands of the wars and the multiple theaters they were operating in, and it
Right.
wasn't just Afghanistan um, and certainly Iraq, it was worldwide.
Mm.
So these, especially the tier one units and some tier two units, were constantly being deployed, and we call it that an operational tempo.
Hmm.
So if your operational tempo is really, really high, you're seeing people essentially burn out,
Mm.
and that has an effect on morale. That has effect on their family life, right, which is most important,
Hmm.
and then it has effect on their overall well-being. Is you can see people deteriorate.
Mm-hmm.
So the community did a pretty good job of raising awareness within the leadership to say, be on the lookout for these conditions, qualities, and or traits in people or behaviors in
Mm-hmm.
people, and make sure that we can help them restore themselves
Yeah.
and come back to a baseline and a threshold so that they can again get back into training. And when they're quote unquote fit for duty, they're deployable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, we see that with high performers. I saw it with my career in elite sport. The performance is what ultimately suffers, and everything else that goes into supporting that is where we have to put a lot more attention. The difference here is the consequences of poor performance, right?
Mm.
You're responsible for the life of the man to the left and right of you. And if somebody misses a free throw in the NBA, everybody goes home and is just fine, right?
They're still getting paid.
There's no real consequence, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's a little sad on the bus ride, to the plane before we get our 5-star meal, So I think the focus here is I'm really pleased to hear that it's improving, because the people out there sacrificing everything for us, really deserve that level of attention and resource,
Mm.
above and beyond what we're giving to professional athletes who get to go home and sleep in their comfortable beds every night. So that sort of leads me in then this whole support network to the psychological side and the psychological impact of this operational tempo on not only our special operators and military, but on our first responders.
Mm.
I think it's perhaps an underappreciated area with our police and our fire service is the psychological impact of those roles. When did that start to shift, or has it started to shift? I think both in the military and in that first responder community.
I would say right now, we're just on, we're in the infancy in the
Mm,
first responder world. The great thing about being in those communities is there's this trickle down effect from the special operations community into the larger military. And then that has a way of penetrating into the service community as well,
mm,
those law enforcement officers. But they're also subject to their budgets. Some
mm,
municipalities are really small, so it's incumbent upon the leadership, and then it's incumbent upon the individual to say, what can I do to myself to improve myself or optimize my health, right? But there's a lot of information out there, and
mhm,
I think that um, we're, as a community at large, we're just on the cusp of implementing some strategies uh, for the people to
mhm,
improve their performance, but most importantly, that when they do go home, they're downregulated, they're
mhm,
recovering, and on their days off, they're fully recovering and they're nutritionally sound. They're aware of the behaviors that might be the result of long-term sleep deprivation,
mhm,
habits of, a lot of people have their adrenal system blown out because of caffeine use or
mhm.
dip in nicotine use. And these are coping mechanisms to keep going because,
Right.
right, the community and the calls demand that. So there's a shift happening.
Mhm,
Um, but I hope to be part of a growing number of veterans that have served in either law enforcement or the fire community to be kind of those shepherds and stewards to make those changes in those communities that have
mhm.
benefited from what's happening in the veteran community and bring that into our first responder community.
Yeah, and I think that the wider high performance community, when I look at executives and others in that high performer realm, I think by extension, that community benefits from these ripple effects that are happening both in professional sports and at the elite levels in the military and first responders. One of those areas that we want to talk about, it's garnered a lot of attention, and that's why I was so keen to have you on to talk about this, because I think how we handle these next steps in this plant medicine world, I think are going to be really critical because there isn't enough information, and people are jumping in, and you're seeing everybody who's ever done a microdose is now a coach, and wants to guide people on these journeys. And, the potential for harm here is absolutely huge. So I'd really like to sort of demystify this a little bit, and let's talk about what this is and what it is not. And you'd mentioned differentiating between plant medicine and psychedelic. I'd love for you to dive a little deeper into that and just make that clarification for us.
Sure. It's my introduction into plant medicine started about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I was at a critical stage for myself and my family. Again, my wife was really supportive. I was in good hands with good people that were traditional healers, healing people in ways that have been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of knowledge that came from the healers that I had entrusted. Um, and when it came to, understanding psychedelics versus plant medicines, and how my worldview on that is psychedelics is a Western term
Mhm.
for a broad spectrum of these compounds that can put you into altered states of consciousness. That being said, is some are synthetic. MDMA is synthetic, albeit very effective in certain clinical areas. LSD is a psychedelic, you know, um, it's effective in, again, certain areas, but the counterculture movement and the movement behind that, for the most part, was labeled and stigmatized, as counterculture,
Mhm.
right, and counterproductive to national interests. Um, with plant medicine, and how I looked at that, is the compounds that I have been exposed to all come from the earth in their natural
Mhm.
state. They haven't been cultivated in a way that, let's say, increases their potency or
Mhm.
efficacy. There's very little human intervention. The healers, the traditional healers that I've worked with, get behind the medicine. They know how to use it, they know how to cultivate it, they pray with it. It's a ceremonial and healing experience for people to participate in, but the whole intention is to heal.
Mhm.
And um, and it takes people in those spaces decades to learn how
Mhm.
to sit and facilitate and certainly hold a space and or a container for people participating in these in these ceremonies. So, everything from ibogaine um, and ayahuasca and wachuma and peyote, these compounds, again, that have been used in Central and South America and Africa for hundreds of years with the indigenous peoples, um, you know, have been used very, very responsibly because the shaman was the healer and you went to the shaman to be healed in some capacity. And with all this attention that's put around this psychedelic movement, you know, it's tricky because in the Western world we're looking for quick solutions, and
Mhm.
certainly the attention can point to solutions, but there's no shortcuts when it comes to this. There's a lot of preparation. Um, for me, there's a delve into history and practice. There's a reciprocity that comes with that, honoring the community that's held these medicines that are going to help me. And there's a lot of cultural humiliation as well, meaning, the Western world, right? When we look at it, we're we're more sick than anybody, and the third leading cause of death in the United States is medical malpractice. So the same
Mhm.
system that's meant to heal us, is also harming us. And I don't think that's intentional on their part. I just think it's a cultural thing.
Mhm.
So the people that I'm working with in both the medical community and the medicinal community, the shamanic community, and in the clinical community, understand that there needs to be a vocabulary built around this. There needs to be
Mhm.
a language so that the Western mind and our linear thought process, our Germanic thought process, can understand as you enter into these altered states of consciousness. Um, what does that mean, and what does that entail? What do we need to prepare ourselves for?
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of their efficacy, certain compounds are known to, decrease chronic brain swelling significantly. Certain compounds are known to not only improve but cure PTSD.
Mm.
Um, but I say that very delicately because we have to treat these compounds with all the respect they demand, because
Mm-hmm.
A, they're not for everybody, and B, there are some contraindications,
Mm-hmm.
both from a physiological perspective and both from a psychological perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Schizophrenia, bipolar, multiple personality disorders, um, you know, so screening, the people who go through this process have to be properly screened so their issues aren't exacerbated.
Mm-hmm. And well, there's a bunch of stuff to unpack there. I think, what are some of the indications, or are there indications where you would choose a psychedelic like an MDMA versus a plant medicine? And I guess, what would be the indications for each of the different plants that you mentioned?
Mhm. So I think it's important if we look at sort of like an example for synthetics. MDMA has shown, really high efficacy rate in terms of seriously improving PTSD to curing it. And the early studies are showing, and recent studies are showing, is MDMA has the capacity to almost silence the amygdala, our limbic
Mm,
system, so that when a memory is triggered, there's usually an emotional response, which puts a person in this emotional loop around that memory. They get stuck.
mhm,
Um, and by silencing the limbic system and the amygdala, that memory can be recalled without that emotional trigger. And so the neural network then can be expanded around that memory with an open heart
mm,
and a diminished limbic system. And so with proper clinical care, it's showing that people can be cured, but that's a very delicate situation as well. The right practitioners,
mhm,
right qualifications, experience, knowledge, wisdom,
mhm,
life wisdom, and spiritual wisdom as well are critical in those formats. Um, on the plant side, Nolan Williams out of Stanford recently published his long-term study from the clinics in Mexico regarding ibogaine and special operations operators. And they're showing significant improvement not only in PTSD, but in terms of chronic brain swelling. So a
mhm.
physiological and a psychological effect.
Wow.
Um, and ayahuasca is also showing early signs of this as well. Wachuma is a cactus, but it's also, it's showing great promise in regulating the nervous system. So the alkaloids in that compound have really helped a lot of people who have been in fight or flight states for a significant period of time. Not only have nervous system release or relief, but also like a discharge and then relief from that.
Mm,
Um, but also, there's some early signs that people who suffer from traumatic brain injury, they dream in black and white
mm,
and maybe a small spectrum of color as a result of their brain injuries. And the alkaloids are showing that if there's some relief with TBI, people are getting their color back
mm,
in their dream states. So what that means requires, some great scientists and neuroscientists and um, medical staff to really evaluate um, what's really a promising aspect, or I should say, a promising benefit to our medical community.
mhm. Yeah, I think you've brought up a consistent theme there, both with the plants and with the synthetics, is the shaman or the clinician who guides you through that process. that for me is perhaps the most important part of this. Um, I view the medicine from my personal experience as a tool to access different things that I need to work on or heal. Who does that with you can have a profound impact on the other side. How would you recommend, if this is an area people are interested in, how do they look for the right practitioner?
That's very, very difficult. I would say first thing is be very patient. Again, in the Western world, we're looking for solutions and an experience, and our default is to, chase or hunt things down.
Mhm.
Um, Take your time, because this is the ability to have a profound effect on your life, both positive and negative, if you're hasty. Um, in the shamanic world, people are trained for decades, and not only it's in the Western world, it's I'm a physician, I know these compounds, I've studied the biochemistry. Right here, here's your
Mhm.
medicine. In that world, it's they have a tremendous amount of experience and a relationship with the plants.
Mhm.
They have a relationship with the medicine themselves. Some practitioners actually ingest the medicine while those in the ceremony are participating as well. They share a field. So you call it the quantum field, you
Mhm.
call it the medicinal field, um, but they're sharing in that energetic field. So to your point about the clinicians and the healers that are in this space with you, you're subject to the energies that they have,
Mm.
both good and bad, because you're in a heightened state of awareness, and you're also subject to absorbing the energies in the room. So not only is it the clinician, but say you go to a ceremony in South America, the strangers in that room are also going to be releasing energy. And you have to be
Mm.
very aware of how to protect yourself, what you might be picking up on that's not yours or is
Mm.
yours, and how to differentiate between that. But people have to do their homework, go out and start listening to some elders from those communities, and elders certainly in our communities. Kat Harrison, who's a PhD in uh, ethnobotany, and and a big figure who's been in the space, since she was 16 years old,
Mm.
and is known as grandmother in some of the Central American countries because of her work in the field. Um, and it's people on that level, a Silver Guevero, Dr. Silver Guevero, who's an Apache and Pueblo Native American that went to Berkeley undergrad, Harvard Medical School, was running departments at Stanford, and now is the clinical director at UCSF and a fellow at Berkeley.
Mm.
Um, but a long history of working with plant medicines as well, and
Mhm.
in Central and South America. These elders, in my opinion, and people on that level, that's very, very important for people to track, because they
Mhm.
have a clinical way of looking at things, a Western way of looking at things, but they've spent a significant portion of their life living in the indigenous ways. Uh,
Mhm.
or the Native American ways. And community healing resonates with them. They're healing
Mhm.
community, they're healing earth, and they understand. So I think those are two great places to start.
Yeah, and a lot of people who will be seeking this out might be people who have been through trauma, PTSD, and so there might be an insecurity maybe of having somebody else present with them in that state. Is this something that people could think about doing on their own? First time through, like how should people be thinking about approaching this as access to these medicines sort of proliferates?
Well, I would never recommend people do this alone,
Hmm.
because again, not only are you navigating a space where you're looking for these elders to be able to direct you to resources that you can explore, but the plants also hold a tremendous amount of intelligence. So in seeking to treat yourself alone, the source of those medicines and where they come from also hold energy.
Mm.
And An example I can give you is I have a friend who lives overseas in a Scandinavian country, and she said, "Kevin, I'm going to be exploring this opportunity in my country. This healer's coming over." And I said, can you speak to her lineage and her training and um, the heritage that she shares with her tribal community?" And she said yes, like everything just seemed to be in line. Unfortunately, that healer could not make it into the Scandinavian country for some reason. But the facilitator, who had only done 1 year of training, did. And it was held in a strange place with 25 strangers. And the container wasn't held tightly and properly. And at the result of 1 weekend of these people participating in this ceremony, where two people were committed and one person committed suicide.
Mm.
So again, facilitators, the source of the medicines, and if people are going to explore this, it's probably pretty easy to get a hold of MDMA.
Hmm.
But what are you doing? You're self-navigating in something you really don't have a relationship with and you don't understand. So talking to people in the space that have more experience, both from the clinical side and from the indigenous knowledge side, I think is very, very important. I mean, it's
Hmm.
critical. We have to protect our people, and we have to be very careful that we don't make problems worse for folks.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that this is seen in a lot of places as a relatively innocuous substance to take. Like, there can't be harm. I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think the lasting effects of an unfavorable outcome here can be absolutely devastating. As you mentioned, two people being committed, one person committing suicide. I think how that's navigated, it just shows the importance. Um, I want to touch as well on the traveling sort of shaman issue that I've seen. We've had a lot of people come to us and say, "Oh, this shaman's coming through town. You should come and experience this, with us." And it's never quite felt right. Um, Almost this sort of celebrity energy, and it doesn't feel like somebody should just sort of breeze through town and do these ceremonies. How should people evaluate? You mentioned a few things there, but how should people evaluate whether they're going into this environment and are comfortable with the practitioner there?
Well, I think if you can get in a conversation with a practitioner, it's very, very important because again, this is a process, and people need to be patient. So before they explore these opportunities, as opposed to being hasty and jumping into an opportunity, to have an understanding as, what is your lineage? Is it Shibibo from Peru? Is it the Santo Daime in Brazil? And how many generations of healers do you come from? Is one way to look at it. Um, and the other,
Can I just ask what difference would the lineage make?
well, there's the use of different compounds from South America have different strengths, but because the Amazon is so biodiverse, the medicines might have different signatures as well, certain strengths. Um, so it's becomes an exploration: is does this fit for me? And a healer that I've known for a little while. I think his advice is the best advice that I can give anybody when it comes to exploring these opportunities. Is he says, trust your gut, listen to your heart, question your head. And so if there's an opportunity, it's like, to your point, how does that make you feel?
Hmm.
Right? Are you ready for this? Are you ready for what's potentially a disruptor? Um, are you feeling good about the people that are participating? Are you feeling good about the healer? Do you feel like you're in very good hands with someone who's really knowledgeable and someone who can prepare you
Hmm.
for something that could drastically improve your life, or or create some disruptions
Hmm.
that leads to another conversation is now, how do you integrate this? Do you have the support and do you have a roadmap to help integrate the lessons that come from these experiences?
Hmm. Yeah, I think the thing that hasn't ever really struck me as being right about these things is the relationship that you have with the healer.
Mm.
Um, Being able to really understand, and this is coming from my own personal experience in this world, is the person holding that container, are they doing their own work? Have they been processing their trauma? Have they reached a level where they should be eligible to provide that service to you? Because so much can be projected into this vulnerable state that can have such a dramatic effect on the outcome,
Mm.
and really guide your experience here, not only during the experience, but for months after.
Yes.
And I think that's the second part of the relationship. If somebody's just there for a day, you have this experience and they leave, what are you doing to integrate the experience that you had and all the stuff that can come up and present? How are you then following up and processing that information into your daily life and the actions that follow up?
Yeah, the support is critical after your experiences and your ceremonies, um, and having a roadmap. Regular interactions with community and or the healer or both is the follow up care and the helping to process something that might not make sense to somebody. Um, is you need the spiritual direction, the clinical direction, and somebody from with an outside point of view that has had a tremendous amount of experience in this field to to basically help guide people, imprint and integrate, um, some of these prolific experiences that they're going to
Hmm.
have.
Hmm.
Again, I say that, you know, I know we're talking a lot about what these warning signs, right? And I think we're doing it justice. But another part of that conversation is, the Western world, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, is in desperate need for this. We're disconnected
Hmm.
from one another. We're disconnected from community. Um, and I saw it in the fire service when we would go out in the community every day. Um, I saw it certainly when I go to the grocery store here and interacting with people and
Yeah.
saying hello to people who, kind of like, what do you want?
Yeah.
When it's people are very disconnected from one another.
Hmm.
And these cultures that have preserved these medicines or don't have these medicinal modalities available to them, you travel the world and most communities are pretty tight because
Hmm.
that's their currency is social currency and they take care of one another and they're very
Yeah.
close. Um,
I love that that transition there, Kevin. I think we've done a good job of outlining, the caution that people need to have in entering this world. But I know, just to speak to that from my first experience with this, sitting there afterwards and just thinking, what a gift that the cultures who have this as a part of the rite of passage
mm,
into adulthood,
mm,
what a gift that is to their young people coming up into adulthood to process everything from their childhood. I often say it, but, I did 10 years of psychotherapy before that. And this was my next 10 years of psychotherapy. In
mm,
that 8 hours, it moved from an intellectual understanding of everything I'd been through to an embodiment in my heart where I really understood it.
mm.
And so, can we sort of start transitioning away from some of the caution now that we understand that and into what this can do for people? Why is it so important in our community? And I guess for me, we talk a lot about vitality here. This is the Vitality Collective. And so, like, what is that essence of vitality that this can bring?
Well, I think in two respects, I'll talk about the heart and I'll talk about community. And when a person works through their trauma or their issues or their healing, so to speak, the pathway is really through the heart. And it's important for me to really explain from my point of view what that means. Is in the last 20 years, evidence is showing in the field of heart coherence that the heart has an independent neuron field. It has over 50,000 neurons that have been measured by the scientific community that thinks and feels and senses what happens in its environment before our five senses do. So when we go into a proper setting with the proper medicine and the proper healer, really what the surgery that's happening is soul surgery. It's healing the heart, and it's making sense of things through forgiveness and compassion and gentleness and kindness and self-care, and processing things with people and a community that let you integrate that and help you implement that. And in terms of community I think there's a great example that was shared with me actually not too many days ago about, there's an African community. I can't speak to what that was, but when one person in the community stepped out of line, the elders in that community encircled that one individual. And in this encirclement, they basically bombarded the person with all their positive traits. And it was to get them back in line. And so when we're living in the United States or the Western world in this anxiety and or loneliness epidemic, it's really incumbent upon us who have done some of the work and or I'm hoping the media and doing it responsibility is really to talk about our civic ties and our discourse, so that we've been separated for so long and driven apart for so long by different agents that we're suffering from this loneliness and our disconnectedness. And plant medicine's one way to certainly rebuild that. But I think it's also a leadership issue. Is there's so many good people in this world and in our communities doing great work. Is how do we come to the table and heal together and heal the elements of society and or individuals as a community, not just right. Oh, that person has a problem, and we're gonna shift them off, right, to go receive professional care, but really, right, part of that healing again is in the heart, and so much of that can be addressed through family and friends and compassion.
Because some of the most beautiful moments of those experiences for me with the plant medicine has been those profound feelings of connection. I've never experienced anything like it, and it was really my journey into spirituality. Were these first journeys? It's very hard to describe the sense of oneness and how that changes how you look. I think it just gives you so much more context. It really does transform how you think about this community element.
Yeah, 9/11 is a great example of a unifying agent through tragedy, right? And when you get the opportunity to do your own healing work and then sit in a community setting that may help somebody, whether that's with plant medicine or not, that person is going to be at their most vulnerable, maybe at the worst moments of their life, but they're going through a transition and they're entrusting you, and you're holding a space of deep listening and compassion so that that person can offload what they need to offload and process what they need to process with the support of multiple people that are only there for the betterment of that person. And that brings out our highest virtues with empathy, and sympathies and compassion and relatedness. Is we don't go through this life alone. We're independent. We have been independent since the dawn of civilization, and technology and all these forces drive us apart from one another, which creates these ailments in our society. And what can be these unifying agents is you don't have to be a change agent in your community. All you need to do there is just be there for somebody, because
Hmm.
The fact of life is everybody's going to struggle at some point,
Yeah.
right? Myself included.
Hmm.
I've, I've, run into enough brick walls in my life, but received incredible care and guidance in my life so that I could make sense of things that I couldn't see or I didn't have a perspective on.
Hmm.
Um, and that loving kindness that was bestowed upon me, it it now is my duty to be there for somebody else. It's that pay it forward thing. Is I have, been in the trenches like a lot of people have, but somebody and multiple people helped me out and up and out of that
Hmm.
to live a more fruitful, loving life that has improved my marriage, my relationships, healed my heart, improved my physical condition, my psychological condition, my outlook, and now I can see and I can be there for people who may
Hmm.
be, where I was or in similar conditions,
Hmm.
and be there as a resource, be there as someone just to talk to, or be there to be someone to say, hey, this modality or this program might be a good fit for you or a good first step for you.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
community is critical, not just in terms of our well-being, but I think it's essential to, our fulfillment in life.
Yeah. And I think one of the things to bring up for people here is relationship being everything, and often your relationship with yourself. One of the things that this has done for Michelle and I both is it's been one of the first times that we've also experienced self-compassion, that critical, the inner critic that we have in our life. It's the first time that the volume has been turned down on that. And you can look at situations in your past, you can look at traumas through a compassionate lens so that you relate to yourself differently. And relating to yourself differently allows you to relate to other people better. And I think people's own inner healing journey here is so critical to that community healing component. That for me is a really profound difference in me before the medicine versus after.
I agree with you 100%. We see in the first responder community and the veteran community, we hold ourselves to such a high standard, and the inner critic, right, is always finding the negative far more than the positive.
Hmm.
And so this voice that hits us is our own, and that's 90% of the time, if not more.
Hmm.
And because that language makes an imprint, right, the plant medicines have a way of creating space around that so we can forgive ourselves and be
Hmm.
more gentle with ourselves and know that we're human and we do err, and that we can move into a more spiritual path in life and do it with other people, and share our common desires and our goals,
Hmm.
but also carry ourselves with a lot more humility where if
Hmm.
I've had my fair share of injuries and I'm navigating those and I'm coming up on double knee surgery, double knee replacement and a shoulder
Hmm.
replacement. And I know, hey, I not only need a place to rehab, but I've got this incredible resource in you to say, Jeremy, I'm going to get one perspective on this, but I would really love your perspective on here's where I am. I'll drive down. I'll see you. Would you mind evaluating me?
Hmm.
Um, and entrust other people. Just, people are at their best, and we forget this, but people are at their best when you say, when you reach out and you say, I could use some help.
Hmm.
Who turns to anybody down? Nobody. Right.
Right.
But we're afraid to do that because it's so ingrained in us to be individuals and to self-navigate life. But I would say,
Hmm.
you know, the the greatest gifts is just tapping into other people and
Yeah.
learning and offloading and sharing with other people and receiving. Right. It's
Yeah.
okay to receive.
Well, and I think what really changed my perspective on this is thinking about how much I enjoy giving, but was always very, very hesitant to ask and receive.
Yeah.
But you're denying the other person the joy that you get.
Mm.
from giving. So I think there's a reciprocation there that's really important in that conversation, where don't deny the people who love you the opportunity and the joy that would come from helping you.
Yeah.
You know, I just think that's such an important message. And something else that I saw a lot, particularly in sport among coaches, um, was that this whole self-compassion thing, you know, kept them strong, kept them sharp. You know, self-compassion was for the weak, sort of mindset. What do you say to that guy? You know, he's still in that mindset.
Well, I would say the best leaders that I've ever come across in both the military and the first responder community do lead with empathy and
Hmm.
compassion. They have a greater understanding of the human condition. Human beings are very, very dynamic and complex. So to be able to have that emotional intelligence and lead with virtue, I think are paramount to leadership and getting the most out of people. That's my opinion when it comes to that. There's a term in the in the leadership community in the military that are there's hard resets and soft resets. And a hard reset is when somebody comes in and wants to reinvent the wheel. I'm going to do it my way. I know how to get the most out of my people, and it's been proven through research that you will get um, really good gains, but for a short period of time.
Hmm.
And the person who
Hmm.
comes in with a soft reset, right, then evaluates what's working. Right, I don't need to change anything, but now how do I enhance this, and how do I get the most out of the individual,
Hmm.
a la Ted Lasso,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And it's been proven that you will get the long-term gains
Yeah.
and human development, not skill development. You will get human development out of that person.
Yeah. That's such an important point. And you think about the environment in sport, and, you know, the head coach can get fired in 3 days. So, you know, people are actively not thinking about 5 years' time.
Yeah.
No, I'm not here in 5 years. You know, why are we thinking about that? And so, you know, I found the frustration in trying to work on people development,
Mm.
in an environment that is, we must win Saturday. That's it. Um, it was really hard to be in that environment where we almost weren't allowed to develop the person. But I always thought, like, you'll never be limited at that level by your skill set. Everybody who got there has a really good skill set. Now, what's important is who you are beyond that. So what are your soft skills? How do you action your skill set?
Mm.
And so the people development side, assuming that everyone's a great practitioner, is everything really to creating a cohesive team.
Yeah, if we treat other human beings or our career as transactional to, for performance purposes, right, and a win in my career, what are we doing?
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
right, you're going to end up on a very small island all by yourself.
Yeah.
The currency is in the people, it's in those interactions, it's in developing relationships. Steve Jobs, in his book before he passed, had mentioned, the biggest element of his success was 90% of his effort went into networking, developing
Hmm.
relationships with people. I don't know everything, but I need these people to come be a part of this mission and give them a through line so that we can build this company together.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, that's an example in business, but certainly in life is, it's with an open heart and an open mind. There's so many treasures out there, and I continue to develop at this stage in my life, which is surprising, the most meaningful and deepest relationships that I have with other
Hmm.
humans because I try and I attempt to go into the world to be of service and to be an agent for other people. And the
Hmm.
universe has a way of just paying me back, and
Hmm.
that's not my intention, but it's recognized. Call it spirit, call it God. I'm not going to get into that conversation, with you, but um, but truly being of service to other people has been the most rewarding and fulfilling
Yeah.
element of my life, and it's just rewarded me in so many unexpected ways.
Yeah, I think that's sort of how I found my way to this work, was the lack of fulfillment in achievement. You know, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. And I've talked about it on a number of these episodes where you think you're going to be happy when you make the next milestone, and it never sort of gets there. And it is exactly that. It's all relationships. The
Mm.
thing that really fulfills me is when I can truly help someone. And,
I
I've seen
know.
it in your work. And I'd love to hear about some of the breakthroughs you've seen, like what is possible with this work.
I'm guilty. I bought into the alpha male, example through Arnold Schwarzenegger and
Hmm.
Sylvester Stallone when I was a kid as the example of a hard, strong man.
Hmm.
Um, and I also bought into, I found validation through achievement. The harder I
Hmm.
work, the more I achieve, the more accolades, right? The more I'm proving myself. Um, and and it created a lot of self-suffering.
Hmm.
Um, Granted, I'm not taking away from drive and purpose.
Hmm.
What I am taking away is if my end goal is achievement, it's you're on the podium alone. Uh,
Hmm.
it's moving through with those people around you, lifting them up and and them lifting you up and
Hmm.
moving forward together and developing relationships with people. And it's not always rosy, and it's not everyone's going to be receptive to that, and that's okay. It's all part of it.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't have met you if my heart was shut down. I wouldn't have met a great many people in various industries if I was a closed down individual focused on achievement.
Hmm.
Uh, so,
Yeah.
so-
Well, you also wouldn't have met me if everything had gone really swimmingly.
but to date, there's one person in my life that looked at me as a system, as a complex individual that had various traumas, and even though I was there and scripted and prescribed to be under your care and guidance for one injury, you kind of said we need to stop. We need to do kind of a hard reset with you, Kevin. We
Hmm.
need to get you functioning. And so you're the one person very early on too who said, let's get you moving properly. Let's get
Hmm.
your body functioning properly. You've been compensating for so long, and your youth and your strength is getting you through it. But you're going to have some serious issues unless we do some things. So, you coming into my life at that time was critical because I was still deploying
Hmm.
and I was still going overseas. And that's been a framework for me ever since. I have to go back to those resets and those
Hmm.
exercises that you've shown me. So I'm forever indebted.
Yeah, and well, I really appreciate and I'm humbled by you saying that because you're a person that I've always admired, and I'd say the same psychologically. With some of the work that we've done since then, very similar. You come into those containers that you've created with a specific thing in mind, and it's never that thing.
No.
Right? There's a much wider net that needs to be cast there, and so I think just to speak again to that container that needs to be created for this healing to occur. Um, the presence of the healer, the container that allows you to safely explore those different avenues for healing. And I think how different that can look for people. I think that's really important. You can judge your trauma versus the person next to you, or this person went through this in childhood and I just went through that. I think that it manifests differently for people. Um,
Yeah.
and the outcomes are certainly very different. So not to diminish your own experience.
Yeah, we can't weigh apples versus oranges in a healing space. Is everybody has something that's holding them back, and
Hmm.
trusting other humans, in sharing the nuances of those things that make you quote unquote weak or
Hmm.
susceptible to judgment. That's the shame and the guilt we blanket ourselves with.
Hmm.
But if you just take that leap and you step into opening yourself and your heart and releasing what you're holding on to
Hmm.
and allowing community to come in, that's the beauty of these indigenous and
Hmm.
ancient ways of healing is you didn't you weren't allowed to come back into community if you were a Spartan and you had just gone to war. You had to go see the shaman first.
Hmm.
And you had to go walk through a labyrinth and yell into a fire, a massive bonfire. You had to release the energy that you
Hmm.
absorbed and the trauma, maybe losing your brother or cousin or uncle or father, in these extreme circumstances. The health of the community depended on that. But it
Hmm.
started with these rituals, and it started with an understanding of we serve the community, and the community needs to step in to help heal individuals so
Hmm.
that the community can thrive.
Yeah. And I think, the shame that we carry with whatever trauma or actions that we've had in the past, it is such an isolating force. I
Mm.
think that's the thing that gets rid of the shame is that container that brings you back into community. Because I think it's a self isolation when you feel that shame and you don't believe that there will be a container there for you, or be support there for you.
Mm.
And so with our warriors that are coming back, and our first responders, how do we create this container as a community for people re-entering our community today?
Wow. From again, this is just my opinion. But I think it starts with an act. You can go online, hashtag this, GoFundMe this nonprofit. Those are all very noble in their own way. But, labeling people, quote unquote, as heroes when they're really just doing the job that they love and they're
Hmm.
very passionate about. Um, and they live in a very tight community, military veterans, law enforcement, fire, they're kind of in their own bubble. And some of the best humans I've ever met, because when crisis hits, they step in, they move forward, but they don't want to be labeled as heroes.
Mm.
And by an act, I mean, for instance, in Los Angeles, if you just have a moment and just take the time and drive to a fire station in Los Angeles County, or if your community provided resources from San Diego or Ventura, or from these outside agencies. I know Sacramento was down there. Is if you live in those communities, just go there and say, is there anything that we can do for you? And it doesn't necessarily have to be something material, but a simple thank you and a handshake means everything in the world to that community,
Mm.
because we have this human interaction every day and we thrive in that environment. So for us to have that relationship with the community is just enhances our whole experience altogether. So, you know, getting involved, um, being aware of what communities need, certainly, more needs to be done. And to your point about, what our first responder community needs, as you had mentioned earlier, is we have numerous veterans organizations out there that do a very good job, um, not only collaborating with one another and interacting with one another and having liaisons between nonprofit to nonprofit so that they don't overlap, but do a very good job fundraising.
Mm.
Our first responder communities really don't have national organizations.
Hmm.
We're talking about, yeah, I think I may get the numbers wrong, but it's, well over, 900,000 firefighters. Half of those are volunteer. And, maybe a little bit less in our law enforcement community. But there's no national nonprofit organization that can serve the needs of those communities where there's a family member has cancer.
Hmm.
They lost their home in a hurricane, right? Or
Hmm.
right, or what behavioral wellness programs are available to them that can be sponsored, because one of the things that's apparent in these communities that's, I think, in a broader spectrum, really with men, is we have very poor coping mechanisms. We have alcohol, we
Hmm.
have food, right? And some people even result to worse. Um, and and it's just a release. We don't know how to process, and we don't know how to cope. So the anything to support something in those veins, so they can make not only a cultural shift internally within those communities, but a societal shift so that we can, um, you know, uh, create these ripple effects from law enforcement or fire into the
Hmm.
greater community as well, taking care of our own.
And is there anything you mentioned, maybe there's not on a national level, but on a local level, what can people look for to get involved in these sorts of movements?
Yeah, I would go to city pages. City pages might be able to direct you to
Hmm.
unions, and specifically whether it's a union or the city or a foundation that has been vetted by the municipalities. Because there's obviously, unfortunately, there's scammers out there.
Hmm.
Is
Hmm.
you just got to make sure that you can donate to a cause that's maybe local or near and dear to your heart, a family
Hmm.
member, wherever. But then the easiest way is just go down to a fire station, LA City, LA County, San Diego, San Francisco, wherever you are, and just say, hey, I would like to contribute somehow. Is there
Hmm.
a site that I can go to donate to this cause, or um, you know, or even some of these people with very, very deep pockets in these neighborhoods is really how can I be part of something that improves the programs that are necessary uh,
Hmm.
to the working members.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that Santa Barbara and Montecito as a community does really well. They have a big fundraiser every year. All of the local celebrity residents show up for, and people do a really good job of contributing. So we'll be sure to link to all of those local sites for our community, and we'll see if we can pull some other resources for people that they can get to. Um, we're running over. I'm taking up way more of your time than you volunteered here. So I'd love to wrap with some of the key takeaways that you think people looking to this sort of work should be undertaking. So who is it for? How do they go about finding a practitioner? What should that roadmap be that you had alluded to?
Um, so, in terms of support, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, just people's journey through this. How do people approach this work who have maybe started to become interested in it?
So, I would, a great starting point, besides the two people I had mentioned with Kat Harrison and Dr. Silver Govedo, is, you can go to websites like The Mission Within, and you can look at their board. Go to their website, look at the board. These are all legitimate neuroscientists and physicians who have worked in the plant medicine space as well, who are advocates for it, and just start doing some research about where some of these resources that they would endorse exist, and start your journey there.
Hmm.
That way, you're vetting right through people who are both professionals and they're licensed, um, who have a tremendous amount of experience, um, not just as a clinician, but actually going to these sites and these ceremonial locations and have long-term standing relationships with traditional healers. So that's a really good starting point. And there's other organizations out there like Coast to Coast. That's a 100% nonprofit. It's a veteran-owned organization where 100% of the proceeds go to helping veterans. Hey, you need a flight and you need to go to treatment for rehab. Boom, here it is. It's all covered.
Hmm. Hmm.
The Coming Home Project, a great friend of mine, runs that program to get veterans in to receive psychedelic assisted therapy, um, and that's just a few. But I'm hoping, at some point in the next couple of years, I'm working with some people that can certainly serve the first responder community in the way we've served our veterans.
Amazing, amazing. Well, um, I'm really happy that you shared some of those ways that our listeners can maybe support your work. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about? Any other ways that our listeners could help support you and the work that you're doing?
I would say the best thing that we can do as an audience and for a community is to reach out to your local congressman or senator and write a letter and talk about, can we start looking at the research? And there's
Hmm.
plenty of research out there. And how can we serve our community at a grander scale? Yes, let's get veterans into care, into clinical care using these modalities with either the VA and or hey, let's have them government sponsored to go down to some of these traditional healers, and then have a broader conversation. What are we doing for our first responder community? And then, right, that trickle effect. What are we doing with our larger community as a whole? Because we're dealing with poverty, right? We're dealing with homelessness. We're dealing with some critical issues at this period of time in our nation. And I don't want anyone to be left out by highlighting, these specialized and yet small communities. Our nation is an incredible nation. It's a young nation. It's a wonderful place to live and be, and a community to serve. But we need to heal in our own way.
Beautiful. Well, Kevin, on that note, we will wrap. It's such an honor to have you here sharing your wisdom from your years of experience, the multiple different lives you've led. We're very, very grateful for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I look forward to taking you and your wife to dinner soon when we see each other next. Be well, and I love you, brother.
Yeah, I love you too, brother. That was an incredible conversation with Kevin Vance on trauma, healing, and responsible use of plant medicine. Here are the 3 key takeaways from today's episode. Number 1, healing is multidimensional. Addressing the body, brain, and heart requires intentional tools, from breathwork and brain therapy to traditional plant medicine. Number 2, integration is everything. The medicine is just the beginning. Support systems, guidance, and long-term follow-through are critical to lasting transformation. Number 3, healing happens in community. Whether you're a veteran, a first responder, or someone who is quietly struggling, there is power in showing up for each other with compassion. If today's discussion resonated with you and you're looking for ways to integrate early detection, personalized health strategies, and strength-based longevity into your life, we'd love to help. At Vitality Collective, we've built these principles into a comprehensive system designed to optimize health and performance at any stage of life. If you're ready to take action and see how this approach could work for you, visit www.vitality-collective.com to learn more. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.